to take a few minutes to welcome you and to remind you of the housekeeping items before we get started. We've been asking you to enter your name and affiliation in the chat box. If you have any questions or communications during the webinar today, we would ask you to use the chat box. We're going to monitor it throughout. Everyone can see those remarks, and so that's one of the reasons we'd like you to use the chat box. Since it's now at the top of the hour, I'm going to officially begin, and what I'll do to start with is introduce our moderator. We're very pleased to have Mark Harvey, State Archivist from Michigan, who is going to serve as our moderator today. And I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and he is going to introduce our presenters. So take it away, Mark.
Great. Thank you very much. And I apologize for my scratchy voice. Fortunately, you don't have to listen to me the whole session. I'd like to introduce our two guests today, Dan Stokes and Chris Eck of NARA and NHPRC. Dan has been at NARA for about 31 years. I hope we have that right, Dan. He's filled many roles there and is currently the Director of State Programs for NHPRC, and is really the source for all of us to get lots of answers to questions we have about the SHRABs and partnership grants and whatnot. So we're really excited to have him present today and give us more information on those topics. Thanks, Dan. Chris Eck is the, I would say, newly appointed, maybe recently appointed is more accurate now, Executive Director for NHPRC, and comes most recently from the Department of Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, where he worked with archivists and historians and archaeologists in efforts to locate and recover missing U.S. service members. Chris also has experience in historic preservation with the GSA and Miami-Dade and Broward counties in Florida. And so welcome to Dan and Chris. Thank you very much. The next slide is, we're on the agenda, so we're gonna kick off with the SHRAB Town Hall, and I'll be tracking as moderator questions that we have. So if you want to add them as we go along, you can do that. I'll also try to think of some as we go along as well. So that Q&A will come close to the 10 minutes remaining in the hour, and then I'm gonna kick it back to Mary Margaret if you want to talk about the upcoming programs and webinars.
Okay, that sounds great. Let's see, Chris, we're going to give you the moving the slides forward if you want it, and it's on the left-hand side. So take it away, Chris.
Well, thanks for having me, Mary Margaret and Mark, and for your kind welcome. I feel fortunate to be here at the NHPRC and working with all of you. I wanted to just say that I've had a really wonderful welcome from everyone that I've met, most recently at the SAA, and also just coming on board with all the staff here. Dan in particular has been very helpful. I know many of you are interested in finding out about where we are with the proposed budget. We are as well. As it last stands, you can see from the slide that what the Congress has been doing is been looking to break up some of the funding bills so that it doesn't get hung up on some of the larger appropriations through what they call minibus spending bills. And we're in one of those. The good thing is that both the House and Senate have approved the committee spending proposals in which the spending for the NHPRC, though some of the terms of the bills may differ slightly, but the amount of $6 million has been agreed on by both committees and seems likely to pass both the full House and Senate. Right now, we're just waiting to see how those bills move through, but right now it does not appear that there's any jeopardy of that not being approved to move forward. Despite that, it is likely that, from what we've heard from John Hamilton, who's our Director of Congressional Affairs here for NARA, is that we still may go into continuing resolution and not have our specific funding bill passed till after the early December. If that's the case, then we'll be continuing on through a continuing resolution process where we won't have access to our grant funds until the final bill is put through, as many of you all know. Let me see, so hit this little, where do I'm trying to find the button right here.
I think you're good. That's a 5th slide, so I think that's where you wanted to be.
Oh, okay, there we go, yeah. Okay, so those of you that I've had a chance to speak with know that one of the things that we've been doing with the Commission is looking to see those areas where we could help focus the work of the Commission on some areas of interest that have been underappreciated by the members of the Commission in terms of areas to focus on, and one of which is early legal records. And so at our June 6th meeting, one of the things that they passed was to create an initiative to promote applications for grants in the early legal records. Early legal records, I had a chance to bring this up at the SAA, as did Deputy Director Lucy Barber and others, as did the archivist himself when he was being interviewed at the opening. Is our hope that because early legal records contain material throughout the country of great interest to a lot of people and has become a focus of a lot of researchers, that this will be someplace that will bear fruit in terms of applications that may come before the Commission. We've chosen deliberately not to define what categories of records we consider early, because what's early in one part of the country may be not so early in another. And it doesn't obviate any existing categories of grants that may be processed. So right now it looks like we've had actually a fairly good amount of success in getting the word out. And for the access grants that have been submitted for the drafts, it looks like 11 of 25 preliminary proposals have come in that touch upon early legal records and government records. We also, this past week, had the Mellon Foundation come by and work with us. Daryl Meadows, our Director of Publishing, many of you know, he's been working with the Mellon Foundation to help kickstart a digital edition publishing cooperative to look at what the future of scholarly publishing will look like in the digital age. And that was last week, the 19th through 20th. There was 8 groups that were invited to attend, and that went very well. They'll be coming for more meetings in the future. So this was just an initial kickoff of this process. One of the things that was brought up at the June meeting that we had a few months ago was also discussion of the America's 250th. As many of you know, about 8 to 10 years before the bicentennial in 1976, planning for events that would take place in that year started being considered. And what we're trying to do now is look ahead to the future, 8 years from now, and what we might do at the NHPRC for the 250th celebration ourselves. And some of the things that were brought up at our Commission meeting, including looking at those publications that we may have funded that may have the ability to be put online and be made publicly accessible, to digitize those that may not already be online, and perhaps enter them into some sort of repository that the public could have access, such as the Digital Public Library of America, which the NARA and the archivist David Ferriero have been putting a lot of attention into in the last few years. And also in more recent development, he is pushing, the archivist is pushing our cooperation with Wikipedia because of the public's use of Wikipedia and the desire for a lot of people to try to see the quality of the information on that platform improve. We're looking to work with the Wiki Education program through a virtual visiting scholar to work with the NHPRC to help develop articles or new articles or improve existing articles on Wikipedia that touch upon information that the NHPRC has funded through grants to many of you in the states and territories. And so we're looking forward to that. And that's some of the latest developments and activities here at the Commission. And I'll let Dan take over from this.
Okay, hello everybody. Am I projecting out to everybody? I'm assuming
yes,
I am.
I can hear you. I
Very
think
good.
so.
All right. We always check on
You sound good, Dan.
That's part of our tradition here is to say, can you hear me now? So I'll keep up with that tradition. We're going to cover several topics over the next several slides. And if questions and answers come up as I'm talking, either I'll try to notice them or Mark, go ahead and just interrupt me so that we can answer questions as we're on that topic. We can also go back, obviously, but if you've got something, don't be worried about interrupting. Because we want to make sure things are clear. Chris had talked about the appropriations going on, and it appears that two of the bills have passed, and one has been signed by the President. The other one will likely be signed when whenever he signs it. Although we're not in the funding bill, but we'll be in the continuing resolution. For those of you who may want to know, IMLS is actually in one of the spending bills, so they will not have to worry about continuing resolution. They'll be functioning for the year. Will be likely delayed, and so that means new awards that are made in November at the November Commission meeting will be delayed like they were last year because we expect that since the White House recommended no funding for us, that the Office of Management and Budget will temporarily take away all of our money, that's even the money that we're carrying over from this year to next year, and won't let us make any grants until we have an actual appropriation. This does not affect payments on current grants. All that money has been obligated by the Treasury Department, so you don't have to worry about getting delayed payments on current grants, but there will be delays on any new grants. We will try to get all the paperwork done no matter when the money is available, so that when it does become available, we don't have to wait to get those out to you. Many of you had to start later than you had planned because of the delay this past year. Hopefully it won't be quite so long this year, but we will see what happens. One thing we talked about, for those of you who were at the joint meeting here in Washington in August, was some changes to the State Board Programming Grant Program. What's likely to happen is we'll continue to offer the current grants that can provide you up to $40,000 a year. But there also may be added to that a smaller program. We don't know what the limits might be. The Commission will have to decide that in November. But these will be for boards that have plans for limited activities and that are very specific. Basically, what we're thinking of, but once again, the Commission will decide what it actually looks like, is offering a menu of activities, and you just say, I'm going to do 1, 3, and 7, and you will not have to do quite as extensive an application or as extensive, hopefully, some of the other paperwork. We'll see how that works. Once again, the Commission will decide how it wants to do this. And also, they'll decide if they're going to put any more money into the program. It may be that we'll offer these two options. There may or may not be more funding available. That fluctuates from year to year based on our appropriation and level of returns we get and just a variety of factors. So all of that will be revealed as soon as possible after the November Commission meeting so that you will have as much time as possible for your boards to get together and think about what options you might want for which program to apply for. It'll be, we're expecting it'll be one or the other. You won't be able to do some kind of limited activity with one and then get another grant to do a bigger program. It'll be, you'll apply for either one or the other programs. Let's see, grant announcement changes. Even if the programs stay the same, which I don't think they will, we'll be making some changes to the grant announcement for this program. what we'll probably do is add more specific requirements for certain types of programs, such as for re-grants, we may require that there be some kind of an online component to any re-grant that's over a certain dollar amount, or we may require, and that doesn't mean digitized records, it might mean an online descriptive information, not even a finding aid necessarily, but possibility that if you do provide grant funding for something as basic as rehousing in archival boxes and folders, we might expect that there be at least an online box list somewhere available so that there is some kind of an online component to any grant that you provide. There may be a dollar amount, anything over $2,000 has to do this, but those will be outlined in the new grant announcement. And also, I think a better explanation of what we mean by certain terms, such as public engagement and things like that, because what we mean and what you sometimes mean in your applications is not quite the same, and sometimes that's fine, and sometimes it's not quite so fine. So we're going to try and define things and say this is what we mean by this topic, so that you get a better idea of what we're looking for specifically. We are going to keep trying to keep it as kind of free and open as possible, so that if you have new ideas and different ways of doing things, we don't want to stifle any of your creativity when you develop programs. So we don't want to be too restrictive, but we do want to provide more information up front so that you're not wondering what we mean by certain things or if your program is going to match what we're looking for. Also, it's going to be reworded somewhat to reflect the Commission's strategic plan. There are several areas in the plan that we want to make sure that you know about and how they might relate to your programming. These areas of the plan include, and many of these are going to sound familiar because they're things many boards are already doing, but we want to encourage other boards to do it as well, is support professional development opportunities for archivists, not just professionals, but also volunteers who function as archivists, developing and disseminating best practices and tools and methodologies to get those out to various institutions. I know one situation we've had often is you've told us about smaller institutions just Google digitization or Google something else, and of course, 1,590,000 websites come up, and that's kind of where they stop. So by doing some kind of best practices, tools, and methodologies that you might use to pull information together for smaller institutions to use. Broadening the preservation of and increased online access to historical records. Those are probably, as I kind of mentioned before, going to be linked. If you're doing a project to do preservation, we're going to likely also want to see some kind of online access linked to that preservation so that there's some kind of information available outside of your institution about that. Training people of all ages in using primary sources. Several states have History Day projects that they do, either awarding scholarships or supporting training for teachers. And we're looking to get that beyond students and out into the public. Maryland is doing that. They have a couple of activities that they do where they invite people into the state archives during Archives Month and show them how to use primary sources. So we do want to get a little more into the public and not just students using records. That's another one is kind of a repeat of that, partnering with state boards to do projects that enhance public participation in the work of archives. I think that's somewhat of a response to projects that will process a collection, then maybe digitize it, but not really go to the next step and say, now I need to make sure people know that this exists and how they can use it and why it's important, making sure that we address all phases of an archive's work. Encouraging a wider pool of applicants to all of our programs. That's where state boards can help, not through the grant program necessarily, but just any activity they do. We are going to depend on you more to help us identify institutions that you think should apply to our other programs, be they public engagement or the Access program, the major initiatives, or any others that you think, so that we are being more proactive, reaching out to people rather than just waiting for applications to show up on our doorstep. This is also related to an earlier one, funding and creation of tools for smaller repositories and underserved communities, so that you do create maybe something that might be used for community archives or to draw archives in from various communities, or a smaller repository that may not be able to do a certain kind of processing but can do a different, something that's a little more attuned to people with part-time staff or all volunteers, but addressing those smaller repositories and the underserved. Another area, working with state boards and others to advance the capacity of local institutions, so that we have, and I'll be showing you a few examples of this, you might offer training programs followed by implementation grants, or a tiered level of programming of different levels of training, or follow-up programs where you check with people who took over workshops and said, are you using this? Is this beneficial? Do you want to apply for another grant that might help you in another area? So that we do continually work to improve the capacity of archival repositories of every size. And then supporting workshops through a variety of sponsors, either the board doing it or your state, if you have one, a state professional organization, to get archival education out there. Many of you are finding it's useful to collaborate with a larger entity, like Massachusetts does. They have an archives track that they help support within their state conference. So while people are there mainly for maybe a more humanities-based conference, they can attend an archives track, and because that's funded by the grant, people don't have to register for the meeting. They just can register free of charge to attend one of those sessions. So it offers something free for them. So that'll be showing up more in the announcement. We're going to try to keep it kind of brief. We don't like to have really long announcements, but we do want to make sure that we're providing you with much background as we can. So I'm going to present a couple of projects here that are currently underway or just finished that are kind of moving in a direction that we support, and so we don't expect you to do these exact projects, but they are the type of activities that we're finding useful. Digitizing North Carolina's Hidden Collections Project. As you may know, North Carolina has had a consulting type of program in which an archivist goes out to various repositories and helps them develop their program or look at their collections and help them with ideas for preserving them. And so following up on that, they have a project that is, as this says, designed to increase access to historical records housed in smaller repositories that lack the resources necessary to provide that online access. So when they were doing their on-site visits, they were realizing that some people just don't have and are likely not going to have the resources to do an online access project of their actual records, and that we may not necessarily need to expect everybody to be able to do that themselves, but to be a conduit for helping them. So what North Carolina is doing is taking applications from folks who are suggesting various collections that they would like to have digitized. So what this is doing is the project is identifying records, transporting those records to Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, scanning them, putting them online on Digital North Carolina, and then returning the records to the original repository. And as they even say in their report, that this addresses two strategic planning elements of expanding access to records and enhancing the capacity of small organizations. So NHPRC funds were used to hire a part-time archivist who is at Chapel Hill and is doing the scanning and creating the metadata for these. So basically, where they are now, they're in the middle of this project right now, is they've done the planning and the coordination and the meeting between, as you can imagine, this requires a lot of coordination to get it to work properly. They received 22 applications and are funding 20 of those. What they did find is that they do have to get back to some of these folks and say, you know, either this collection is too large, so what part of it can we do, or this isn't really, these aren't really archival records. What other collections do you have that we might put in here? So they've been willing to work with folks to not just say, no, you can't have money, but rather, we'd like to help you. What might you have that we can work with? And a variety of other problems that have people putting in too recent records. The Chapel Hill folks, they only digitize records that are a certain age, and so anything more recent they won't do. And they are set up to do moving image and things like that, so they do need to be paper records and photographs and things like that. But they've worked with the institutions, and they're all have identified records. So some of the records that they'll be digitizing in the coming year or so: student newspapers from African American high schools prior to desegregation, personal papers from the 19th century, yearbooks, scrapbooks, photographs, papers of African American community leaders and professionals, administrative records, and all kinds of other good stuff. And they've received applications from a wide variety of folks: universities, community college libraries, history rooms at public libraries, and even some places that are more well established, but they maybe don't have the resources within their archives. I'm sure you're all familiar with institutions that maybe have very strong library and education programs, but don't provide much in the way of resources to their archival programs. So sometimes well-established institutions still need some small grants to help them get along. Also, who else? Some museums and historic houses, so all kinds of different institutions. Now, as you see here, they do provide training, so everybody who is awarded participation in the program does have to attend a workshop where they're told about how to prepare their records, how to create metadata, how to do digitization. Even though they aren't doing the digitization themselves, they do want to understand the process, so they might take this on themselves. And they've also found that at these workshops, which they're just starting to hold, some people are actually able to bring the records with them. Otherwise, State Archives staff will actually go to each repository and pick up the records to take them to Chapel Hill. So that's useful if they can bring them to their workshops. So they've kind of learned things as they've done this, how things might work. So everything is housed at the State Archives in Raleigh, anything that's brought to the workshops, so that everything is transported to Chapel Hill in one big deposit, so that they're not having records all over the place, but always in one or two places. So the records are transported to the Digital Heritage Center in Chapel Hill, and then returned to the repository, and then they're placed on Digital North Carolina. So this is a project that I think they're about a third of the way through, so they're going to have some more information to share on how this is all going to work and how well everything is being coordinated. So I think this, the final report or even the interim reports from this will be interesting to share with other folks, so we'll be making those available so you can kind of get an idea of how this program is working, if it's something that you think you could do. It obviously is personnel heavy, and a lot of people have to commit time, but grant funds can be used to pay for program staff. We try to keep administrative staff to a minimum, but program staff we're willing to support. So if you do need someone who maybe does all that traveling, transports all the records back and forth, does the workshops, you could use grant funds for that purpose in this case. So if this looks interesting, we'll be sharing more information about this. The next one, the Kansas board. This is the idea that I talked about before of a variety of tiered programming and doing several different activities. And once again, Kansas has received funding for administrative or for programming assistance to help with all this, so they're not doing it all themselves. They are receiving grant funds to do this. They have a re-grant program, once again, that's focused on digital access. Basically, you can digitize them yourselves, or they'll take care of that themselves. You can put these up on your own website. If you don't have a website, the board will put them up on Kansas Memory so that they'll have a place to go. So you don't have to have a place to put them yourselves. As you see, they give preference to repositories with 500 feet of records or less. Several boards use this as kind of a cutoff point for their preferences, 500 cubic feet. I don't know who thought of that, but everybody seems to like it, so we'll go with it. We have also an awareness-raising campaign to articulate an online audience for the value of archives that they use through their social media, so that gets beyond, like I was talking about, beyond just students to the public. They've, probably more than any other board, have done vendor tables. I believe their last report, they did 13 of these during one grant, where they go to a variety of genealogical conferences, county meetings, other places where they have either a vendor table or they do a presentation to kind of let people know about their programming. So that has been very beneficial for them. Scholarships to help defray the cost of education, continuing education. This is one way that boards are finding they don't have to create a workshop or find a place to put the workshop or create curriculum or do the outreach or do the registration or any of that. They just offer money, and then you apply for grants to say, I need to go, or I would like to go to this offering because it will help me in this way and will advance myself and my institution. They were also lucky enough that one year Midwest Archives Conference meeting was in Kansas, so that allowed them to provide several scholarships for people to go to that meeting, which was nearby. So that can be a useful thing if you know in the next year or two that a major meeting is coming your way. You can offer some kind of assistance to get people to that meeting. Also, they do this follow-up, which I talked about before. Re-grant recipients are being surveyed about the program and how it works and if they offer suggestions. And scholarship recipients are surveyed for feedback on how their training helped them and to identify other types of training that might be useful. So that's one area that we're going to be stressing more of is following up with re-grant recipients to say, do you need another grant? Are there other activities you're doing on your own? Because we don't want people to do one thing and then just stop and nothing else happen. We want to keep them building themselves either as professionals or as an institution or both, preferably, so that people keep improving and they don't have kind of a one-stop episode where they just do one thing and think they're done or think that's all they are allowed to do. We want to make sure people continue to advance. Here's some other state board projects that I think are offer good ideas for other boards. The Texas board is offering free registration for various digital archival specialist workshops and webinars that are offered by SAA. Many states offer very basic training, which is still necessary because there's still people coming into the profession. But also, in Texas's case, offering kind of the next step where you're offering more intermediate level or advanced level training so people can move forward in their education if they've already got all the basics down and can move forward. So that's useful to be able to offer free workshops because if it's free, it's possible that people can then pick up their travel costs. But having travel costs and a registration fee could be a little difficult, especially in a state the size of Texas. So having just a little bit of help financially could be useful. The Georgia folks are awarding 2 scholarships to the Georgia Archives Institute, and those folks who get those will also receive implementation grants to take what they've learned and implement those their new knowledge into projects. That's, once again, building on, using one program to build on another. So that type of activity, I think, would be useful. Oklahoma board, I got several here for Oklahoma. They do many, many things. Collaborating with various associations and institutions in the state to develop workshops and to offer them. If you can work like it has here with the Oklahoma Museums Association, and by providing a little bit of funding, helping them have an archives course or two offered there. You don't have to put it on. You don't have to do all the work. It's already, you don't have to do the advertising. So these things can be helpful when they're offered with a partner organization. Also an Oklahoma regrant program focusing on online access. One thing that is a little add-on for that is there is an intern who can offer assistance. So there is a dedicated person who can, you can either call them up and say, okay, I'm stuck here, what do I do here? Or in some states, it might also be able to do an on-site visit, depending on the size and distances in your state, to have someone who's dedicated to helping folks, because we do find some regrant projects, they accomplish something, but it maybe isn't quite what we thought it was going to be. So to keep people moving in the right direction can be useful. And also, Oklahoma also has a traveling archivist to provide one-on-one instruction and best practices to repositories. So this is in addition to the regrants where you're actually doing the project. The traveling archivist comes in and kind of helps you learn. So then that might be followed up by a regrant project. So that once again, we have Oklahoma offering kind of a tiered service. You might take the training at the Oklahoma Library Association and then have a traveling archivist come in and look at what you might need to do to implement your training, and then get a regrant to get the funding to actually do it. So being able to offer all those, Oklahoma's able to do it all at once. You may want to do this in multiple years to say we're going to focus on training this year, and then maybe site visits another year, and then maybe a regrant program after that, because obviously the staffing available is going to determine that. But once again, we can provide, like we pay for the student intern, and we can provide funding for program staff. And what's next? We talked a little bit about this at August meeting of developing state board resources. These are beyond grants. This is for every board, not just for people who have the board programming grants. This is designed for everybody to use. Some of the training resources that were asked for are in the areas of strategic planning and grant application review. We already have some very good examples of strategic planning. We've got Wisconsin somewhat recently did a, I think, rather exemplary planning project. Some of you may not be able to do one quite as extensive as theirs, so we'll offer kind of several options of how you might do strategic planning. Grant application review, this will be for board members who review grant applications. We have a grant deadline coming up next week, October 4th, for the archival project, so we will be, shortly after that, contacting any of you who have applicants in your states to request board members to be on panels that will review groups of applications that include those from your state. So I think one thing we will be doing as you select people to serve on those panels is also ask them what would have helped you be a better reviewer, or what was problematic about our review process, other things like that, so that we can then use that to figure out what kind of training might be most useful to both new and current board members who are going to be asked to review things. We also have reporting resources that are coming up. Every board is supposed to submit an annual report. I don't think we've required this for, I don't know, 15, 18, 20 years. It's been a little while. What we're going to do now is request that each board submit an annual report, but we will produce a template that you can use to insert information, and we will likely be able to insert many of the pieces of information that are needed on that. Things like, you know, is this your current board membership? Well, you could just say yes if we give you the board membership and it's correct. It won't be long and burdensome. We don't really need the history of the world, so we don't want to encumber you with too much effort. But we do want to know what boards are doing beyond any grant they may have, because many of you do a lot of things that are not directly related to your grant. And we want to make sure that the Commission knows this, because they really are interested in knowing more about what the boards are doing. And that will have some effect on how much money they want to put into the work of the boards. So all of those things will help us out if you can do that. I'll be testing that template with several boards, and if you love it, hate it, have no opinion, we'll take those thoughts into consideration when we develop the final template to be used and sent out. There will be no retribution if you don't submit it. We don't always expect everybody to have time or to be able to do it, so you will not be looked down upon if you don't do this, but just know that it does help if the Commission knows what activities you're engaged in. State Board Programming Grant Reporting. This will be included in the long-promised, hopefully soon to be realized, manual where we will say, if you do workshops, here's the information we'd like to know about the workshops, the attendance, what people thought. Many boards already provide us with the information we need. Others don't provide us with enough, but are willing to do more. I just have to ask, and so we'll be putting that in there. Regrant, like I'll have regrant project samples. You know, when you have a regrant project, here's the information we need, and actually write up a good example of what we'd like to have. Sometimes we get, you know, the Paducah Historical Society process some of their records, and that's really not what we want to know. We want to know what are those records, what time period did they cover, what events did they document, things like that. So that's what the Commission would like to be able to know, because they know it for other programs, so they need to know it for this one as well. Another thing we're going to have probably on the NHPRC website is a State Board meeting calendar where we will have the dates of all the State Board meetings, so that both the Commission staff can say, oh, the Ohio Board is meeting on this day. Let's get something to them for them to look at and comment on and see if they think this is good, or any other kind of information that we would like you to test out or try or know about. And also so that you can coordinate among yourselves. If you see that a neighboring state's having a meeting, you might want to see if one of your folks can either call in or show up, and maybe look at how you might work together in certain ways. I know that can be difficult, and many states have said they can't spend any grant funds in another state, so they can't actually stay in another state or offer a workshop to help fund a workshop in another state. So we'll deal with those situations, but hopefully we can get some coordination where it will work, so we can share ideas and programming and see if there's either duplication to be avoided or duplication that would work, but in general to try to be more aware of when boards are meeting, so we can do various coordination that we need to do. Finally, we're going to be more proactive about letting state boards know about all of the NHPRC's grant opportunities. Although the board programming grants are specifically for state boards, that's not the only grant opportunity that you can apply for. You can apply for any program we have. So we're going to be putting together, we hope, useful information on ideas of how you might put together a archival projects. I have to remember what these programs are called first. Archival projects grant, which would offer you more money if you said, well, you know, these $40,000 a year are good, but if we could have more money, we could maybe develop a statewide program of some sort. The major initiatives where several boards might want to get together and do something based on region or based on topic or based on activity or whatever it might be. And those offer over $300,000. And there's a deadline in January for that. And the benefit of that program is it has a pre-application process, so you can prepare a brief narrative and a limited budget and send that in, and that gets reviewed. You don't have to prepare the final application unless you're invited to do so. So you can put in less effort to get a preliminary idea of whether something will fly or not. So we're going to be encouraging and offering ideas about our other grant opportunities so that the boards can take advantage, or the state archives themselves, if they think the board might not be able to handle it. The state archives can, of course, apply for the others as well. Several of you state archives are taking advantage of the legal records initiative that we have. Of those drafts that Chris talked about, nearly all of them are from state archives. So we have an opportunity to do some early legal records, early being anywhere from, depending on the state's history, from the 1700s. Actually, I think one of them goes back to the 1600s, up to a few of our newer states whose early legal records are from the 20th century. So I think if all of those folks come in after submitting their drafts, we should have some nice state archives projects to announce next June, when those are done. So I think that's all I have. I think the next slide belongs to someone else. So if there's any questions or comments, glad to deal with those.
Dan, this is Mark. I thought I would just jump in and kick off the questions. I think you may have just touched on it, but can you expound a little bit more on the difference between the archival project, access to historical records grant, and the major initiatives? What would you say in a sentence or two are the main differentiating factors between those two grants?
The differences
besides
are,
the deadlines.
Yeah, the differences are the amount of funding. Archival projects goes up to $100,000. Major initiatives, I think it's either $300,000 or $350,000. The second thing is major initiatives requires 50-50 cost sharing. The archival projects only requires 25%. It's like the board grants. We'll provide up to 75%. So those are the two major differences: how much money you can request and the amount of cost sharing. And the third issue probably not required. We do prefer collaborative projects in the major initiatives.
You require them?
No, I don't think we require, but most of the ones who get through to the second round are collaborative projects rather than standalone. So we do want at least 2 institutions to be involved.
Sure. Now, does that also contain that, the nationally significant collection versus something that's more state-specific for the major initiatives?
We're trying to figure out what national significance means still.
Well,
basically, you still need to be able to say, here's how these records fit into telling the story of our nation's history.
Okay.
So they don't have to be all George Washington's letters and things like that, but you do have to say, here's how people will want to use these to deal with significant issues, so that not just the people down the street will want to look at them and nobody else.
Right. I'm just going to read off. I see people are adding questions to the chat stream, so I'll just read them off for you so you don't have to try to pick them out of that. And anyone that wants to unmute and jump in to ask a question, please feel free. So there is a question that just popped up. It said, would other grant program applications offered by NHPRC be affected by the budget process this fiscal year?
Yeah, basically every grant program is affected the same way by any budget process that goes on.
Okay.
So any application that is approved in the next, anything approved after October 1st will have to wait till we have an actual appropriation to be funded.
Okay. will NHPRC aggregate the information from the SHRAB annual report?
I think some of the information will be kind of very distinct, and I mean, we can offer a list of comments or a list of this. I think some of it may be stuff that we can say, oh, the average is this or the average is that, but we will put it all together. None of it will be sensitive or secret, so we would be able to share it with other folks.
Okay.
If you'd like to see things like how many board members or things like that.
Right. Going back to your slide where you talked about publishing, you know, SHRAB meeting dates and all that stuff, when can members expect direction on how to submit the information that the commission wants to put on those calendars?
After I have checked to see how we can do this on our website, since we don't control our website, we send it to other people who then put it up.
Right.
Once we figure out how that all needs to be done, I'll be sending out just an email to everybody about submitting that information. A few of you have it online, but I think I'll just go ahead and ask everybody to send me their dates. Some of you plan for the year, so I know a year in advance. Others, it's only a month or two because of, you know, everybody on your board works, and so it's hard to get people together. But any time that you have the information, I'll send out periodic requests saying, you know, for the next quarter at least, can you send me any dates you have so that we can keep this in your minds so that we can make sure that everybody knows what's going on in other states.
Okay, great. Another question I had, what is your view, maybe you'll say one isn't more important than the other, but just seeing some of the examples of projects that were out there in a lot of these board partnership grants, would you say that helping, you know, smaller organizations get catalog access to their, you know, or catalog exposure to their collections is equally or more important than digitizing them, or does it just depend on the particular details of the project?
I think it would be.
I see a lot of talk of digitizing and getting stuff online, and not a lot of talk of catalog, you know, getting that catalog access to it first.
I think whatever the institution you're working with can do, if the best they can do is well, I don't want to say the best, if what they choose to do is get a template website and put something up on that website, if they can do cataloging, or like you all, if you can do the cataloging for them, that's good as well, because that's where lots of people look for this.
Right.
That's where you go. You say, if I'm looking for maybe the person who's looking for information for a high school paper doesn't look there, but other people doing research are going to go to the catalog and try to find it there. So I say whatever you can offer for assistance and whatever the repository can do to the best of its ability is what we support. Basically having broad access to information and records is the main point.
Okay.
Definitely don't want people to just throw up records online and say, well, that's done, and have lousy metadata for it, or not have any descriptive information at all, but just, you know, a house on the prairie. Well, great, but, you know, you probably should have done more of a finding aid to it before you just put it up digitally. So it's not a race to get as much online as possible, but to make sure institutions are able to get broad access, provide broad access to their collections, no matter what the means might be.
So, and I want to make sure I give everyone else a chance. I'm not seeing any more questions jump up in the chat window, but I'll ask one more and then just open it up to everyone on online, and then we'll wrap it up. But can you, I know you mentioned this, or there was discussion about it at SAA in the town hall there, and you alluded to it today, and maybe I just wasn't listening carefully enough, but can you, did you say that there's some movement to doing board support outside of the partnership grant for, you know, for the things like strategic planning and whatnot?
This is actually a suggestion from the CoSA board of having smaller grants for people who want to do very specific smaller projects and don't want to go through the cumbersome, as some feel it is, application process. We're looking at an alternative application process that would provide a limited amount of funding, and then hopefully it could be sought through an easier application process.
Okay. I thought I just wanted to put that out there again.
It'd be similar to, yeah, if any of you remember the old time when we had board travel and meeting grants separate from board programming grants, and you could ask for a little bit, and it was easier to do that than to ask for the bigger grants. So that's kind of we don't know what the commission will want to do, so it's hard to really explain what it might turn out to be.
Right. Are there any other questions from those of you that are online? I don't see any. So Dan, thanks so much for.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Mary Margaret.
No, well, that's fine. Thank you. That looks like we don't have any others on the chat box. So on behalf of CoSA, I'm going to take this back over and first off, give a really good thank you to Chris, Dan, and Mark for this informative presentation for our SHRAB Town Hall, because this has really been a lot of good information this hour. I'm going to go forward here to our next slide for our announcements. 2018 is coming to a close, particularly as far as our member webinars are concerned. We have one more that is scheduled. That is going to be the October 25th, Thursday, October 25th, Mentoring Future Leaders, and that will be the presentations by the winners of the CoSA Ancestry Leadership Award and the Victoria Irons Walsh Emerging Leader Travel Award. And this will relate to the presentations related to the meeting in August, and so we're going to look forward to that. And then, but we still have Shoptalk webinars. We were grateful our $10,000 plus corporate sponsors are providing these. Grateful we had one in September of 2017 from Family Search, and we had another one just a couple weeks ago from Ancestry. We have an upcoming one on October 16th will be Preservica, and then Apex will present on November 15th. So you'll be seeing reminder emails about that, and we look forward to those presentations. Some other announcements. October is just about to arrive. All month is Archives Month, and so we're going to be celebrating all month long. You see that these events are hyperlinked, and so we do provide the links there to the CoSA website for information on Archives Month. October 3rd, Society of American Archivists sponsors Ask an Archivist Day, and CoSA is affiliated with that as well. So that's going to be Ask an Archivist Day. That's a link to the site about that. October 10th, Electronic Records Day. We have a hashtag, hashtag eRecsDay. You see it there on your slide. And that's always an interesting day to really highlight the emergence of electronic records and all the information we have available about that. Coming soon, also in October, we will have the 2018-2019 Archives and Records Management Survey. The previous surveys are available on the CoSA website, and so that's about to appear. And we do have, going back to the previous slide, be sure and join us on social media on October 3rd and October 10th. And one other reminder, the CoSA Ancestry Leadership Award, the next award presentation, the deadline to apply is November 1st. This is to develop the next generation of leadership, and we encourage you to check that out and to apply if that looks like something that would be a good application. Be glad to have those. Once again, we want to thank our 2018 sponsors and funders: Ancestry, Family Search, Apex Software, Preservica, LibNova, Gaylord Archival, the Space Saver, and also our federal funders, obviously NHPRC, who has provided us with all this information today, the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, and also IMLS, Institute of Museum and Library Services. So we want to thank all of our sponsors and our funders who make this possible. We'd like to remind you once again of the ways to stay connected and informed. A lot of the things I was just telling you about, you can find information about on the CoSA website, www.statearchivist.org. The CoSA Resource Center is available there, lots of good resources. Social media, we're going to be looking at that for Ask an Archivist Day and for the eRecords Day. So our Twitter handle is @StateArchivist, and our Facebook page is www.facebook.com, Council of State Archivists. So we encourage you to check all that out. And let's see if we can go forward here. And as you are leaving us today, you will be given a chance to fulfill out the webinar evaluation. We really do appreciate your feedback. We're meeting next week. We'll have another review of future webinar topics, and so anything that you can provide us will really be helpful about that. Please take a couple of minutes to complete the survey, help us plan those future events. So once again, as we are about to conclude, I want to thank Chris Eck, Dan Stokes, and Mark Harvey, because it was really a lot of good information to hear about the projects that NHPRC has made possible. So until the next time, we'll thank you for coming and look forward to seeing everyone again. Thank you.